Good morning. I have a question for you. Why is it that we still have these quality and safety problems after more than 15 years of intense work to get rid of them? And in the next few minutes, I want to try to offer some suggestions for why that's true, but I want you to think about that as I go through the rest of my remarks. We don't have time to do an exhaustive examination of that question. Worthy enterprise, but we don't have the time this morning to do that. So let me offer a few of the components of the problem. The first component of the problem is you've heard a lot, and in your day jobs you see a lot more of the difficult quality and safety problems that we've been struggling with. The complexity of the task is enormous. Complications by themselves, if you think about the buckets that we've heard about, whether it's venous thromboembolism or healthcare-associated infection or medication errors, each one of those buckets contains dozens, hundreds in some instances, of specific problems that need to be tackled in specific ways. The problems of complications on an obstetrical service are not the same as the complications that occur on a pediatric service. And complications are only one part of the problem. What about all of the processes that hospitals and other organizations have to get right in order to get the right care to patients in the right way so they benefit from it? Think about all of the moving parts of taking care of a patient who comes to a hospital or calls 911 with chest pain in the middle of an acute heart attack. And we figured out by intense work how to get that patient all the way through the processes before the hospital, in the emergency room, to the cardiac cath lab to get that blocked coronary artery opened in time to save heart muscle, prevent death, and prevent disability. But it's a completely different problem when somebody presents with an acute stroke. Similar in that timely administration of critically important medications preserves life and function, but it's a completely different process improvement problem. And then the problems with overuse are yet a completely different set of problems. And then the problems with these very uncommon but catastrophic adverse events, infant abductions, fires in the operating room. Hospitals confronted with all of these problems, trying to work on them at the same time, get what in the business is called project fatigue. How many of these balls can you keep in the air at the same time without seeing them drop and break? Complexity. Nor will we be rescued as an industry in the way the car manufacturers in the US were rescued, in the way consumer electronics manufacturers were rescued by another country's really excellent product, Honda, Toyota, Sony, being dropped into our market, and then everyone in that industry scrambling to make a higher quality product. That can't happen in healthcare. Because even more than politics, healthcare is so intensely local that it really doesn't matter. When I was at Mount Sinai in New York City, it didn't matter what Cedars-Sinai did in Los Angeles. We didn't compete with them. Even if they produced perfect healthcare, it wouldn't have really affected what we had to do or our priorities. So competition is not going to rescue healthcare. Lots of folks from outside healthcare, I've heard this now for more than a dozen years, look at the evidence of quality problems, the evidence of effective solutions, and they say, come on, it's not rocket science, just do it. Well, and I actually agree with that view. It is not rocket science. It's much more difficult. Rocket scientists, well, think about it. Rocket scientists, all they have to do is to get a machine to behave the way they want it to 99.999% of the time. Quality improvement in healthcare is about getting people to do what you want them to do 99.99% of the time. Much more difficult task. And take another very effective way to solve process problems that many, many industries have used, and healthcare is starting to use it, and I know many of you are deeply involved in automating processes so that they don't fail because humans forget to do or get distracted and don't do several steps. And we can use automation, and we have to use automation in healthcare. But any of you who have been part of a failed attempt to automate a process that wasn't perfected before it was automated, know that the last thing you want to do is automate a broken process in healthcare, because that can get dumb things to patients really quickly. And it reminds me of an aphorism that a very wise chief information officer told me many, many years ago, which is that computers don't make us less stupid. They make us stupid faster. So that's a quick tour over some of the difficulties that we have in trying to approach these problems. But one thing we can say today is that we haven't seen this lack of progress because we haven't been trying. And that actually used to be the problem. I've been working in this field for more years than I care to admit. And before the IOM reports of '99 and 2000, we had lots of evidence of quality problems, and we had lots of effective solutions. But the starting point for the problem is that the industry was not galvanized around improvement. And that is completely changed. That environment has completely changed today, and that is an enormous advantage that we have that we didn't used to have. So how do we think about this problem of all of these quality and safety problems that we still have? It would be very nice if we could go visit a healthcare system, a hospital, an ambulatory surgery center, nursing home that had solved all of the problems and see what they did and try to figure out if we could import it back to our place. Unfortunately, those places don't exist anywhere in the world. So you'll be hearing about some of the specific solutions that the Joint Commission Center for Transforming Healthcare has come up with, as Joe mentioned, mostly tomorrow. But another activity that the Joint Commission Center undertook starting 4 years ago was to look outside of healthcare and try to understand why it is that there are organizations in many industries that deal with risks and hazards that are every bit as dangerous, even more dangerous in some instances, than healthcare, but with the big difference that they have vanishingly low rates of adverse events and maintain that stellar performance over long periods of time. So we're talking in the parlance of this field about high reliability organizations that are characterized by what I just said about maintaining superlative safety records, commercial aviation, nuclear power, amusement parks with those wacky roller coaster rides that I don't go on anymore. They all have several aspects of their work that are in common with each other, whether you're an amusement park or a commercial airline. They first have leadership and line workers that are passionately committed to zero failures. They have intensely effective process improvement methods that create nearly perfect safety procedures, and a culture that wraps around all of those highly performing processes that keeps them working at that high level, as I said, over long periods of time. And if you think about how they stay safe and contrast it with where we are in healthcare, you start to see what the gap is between healthcare and high reliability. These organizations don't stay safe by finding a few things that work and doing them over and over and over again exactly the same way. That is not how they stay safe. They stay safe because everyone who works in those organizations, at whatever level, is always looking and is sensitized and trained to look at every process that they come in contact with every day with the question, what is different about this today? What's the small thing that I can see that's different than it was yesterday? It might be something in the environment. It might be something, a new wrinkle in the safety process that didn't quite work the way it was expected. They identify these safety problems when they are very small and when they are therefore easy to fix long before they pose risk to people or to the organization. Now, if you contrast that to where we are in healthcare all around the world, what you will see, I think, is that in healthcare we are almost always reacting after a patient got harmed to try to figure out, now, how did that one happen, and how can we prevent the next one from happening? That is not how these organizations stay safe. So let me do a little thought experiment here. How many of you work in hospitals or are very familiar with hospitals? Lots of you, okay? The people who didn't raise your hand, look at the people who did raise their hands. I'm going to ask you to think about a particular place in a hospital where all of the surgical instruments are cleaned and decontaminated and sterilized. SPD, Sterile Processing Department. And think about the busiest time in that department. After the first cases, when the instruments are coming in, being reprocessed for the second round of cases. And think about a tech who has been hired and trained and is 6 months on the job, working in the decontamination area, and that tech sees that there is a problem with the way the decontamination process is working. It's not working the way it's supposed to. 2 questions. How many of you in the hospitals that you are familiar with or where you work are certain that that tech would do the right thing, call her supervisor and say there's a problem with the decontamination line? Second question. How many of you are equally certain that that supervisor would do the right thing, stop work in sterile processing until the problem was corrected, and call back all those instruments that were reprocessed incorrectly so that they could be decontaminated properly and patients spared the risk of infection? How many of you are certain that those 2 things would happen in your hospital? Right. So I have, everybody saw that about 3–4% of folks raised their hands. I've asked that question all around the world, all around the country. And the most common response is 0. The maximum response I've ever seen is about 5%. Now, if I posed a similar question to a room full of amusement park engineers or aircraft carrier workers, the answer would be 100% every time. The gap between where healthcare is and high reliability is measured in the folks that didn't raise their hands and 100%. So what we've been doing for the last 4 years of the Joint Commission on this particular initiative is to look at all of that work. We've worked with experts from high reliability industries all around the world, all around the country, scholars that have been studying high reliability, and we've translated that into a model that we believe will work in healthcare. You can't take what high reliability organizations do and dump it untranslated, unmodified into healthcare. It doesn't work. And in fact, there's no guidance from those organizations in how you get from an organization, an industry like healthcare, where safety processes fail 40, 50, 60% of the time, to high reliability where they almost never fail. There's no guidance. There are no blueprints. There are no roadmaps. So we've written about this, and I'll talk a little bit more about it tomorrow. Fundamentally, the model requires that healthcare organizations do 3 things. The first is a leadership commitment to 0. Now, you might have thought from my first remarks that I'm the guy that's going to rain on Joe's parade and tell you 0 is impossible. Oh my God, it's so hard. No. The road to 0 starts with a commitment to get there. By leadership commitment, we mean the governing body, physician leaders, nurse leaders, all of the components of leadership need to be aligned around achieving the goal of 0 harm. The second component is the full implementation of all of the aspects of safety culture, which you'll be hearing about tomorrow. Critically important to get to that place where that tech in SPD wouldn't be afraid, indeed would be encouraged, rewarded, and obligated to report that small problem before it did harm. That's the culture change that you've heard folks talk about. And the third big commitment here is to deploy the very most effective process improvement tools across the entire organization. The result of that work is what you're going to be hearing about in the specific patient safety solutions that the center has developed for healthcare-associated infection, for improving handoff communication, and for improving safety culture. All three of those major changes are what's necessary if we're going to get further down this road and actually see healthcare organizations get to high reliability. I've been enormously encouraged over the last couple of years to see a small but growing number of healthcare organizations, hospitals and health systems primarily, that have stepped up to this plate and said, we are going to get to high reliability. And if you ask any one of them, where are you on this road? How close are you? They are the first to say, we know how far away we are. So we can get to zero. Zero is possible. We are seeing it happen in selected areas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. But let's not underestimate the magnitude of the task here. Thank you very much.